You already knew something was different, not wrong. Different in a way that mattered. When you walked past the shelter, you stopped at the cat cages, not the dogs, and something inside you recognized itself immediately. I want to talk about that. Not the animal, the architecture behind the choice. Because your pet preference is rarely about the pet. It is usually about safety, about distance, about what kind of love your nervous system can survive. And the strange part is this. You probably knew already before research ever confirmed it, because some people choose animals the same way they choose relationships. Carefully, quietly, trying to avoid the kind of closeness that once overwhelmed them. And if that sentence unsettled you, stay with me, because this goes much deeper than personality alone, because sometimes people choose distance without realizing they are choosing it, again and again, across friendships, across relationships, across entire years of their life. Meet Lisa, 31, urban planner, small apartment, downtown spider plant near the window, and a cat named Dune. Her co-workers call her warm, reliable, hard to fully know. She arrives before anyone else, leaves after the work is done, never asks for recognition, never complains about exhaustion. At birthday dinners, she remembers every detail. Everyone else forgets, but she never calls first, never reaches first, always waits when friends fall apart. She appears with groceries, fixes practical problems, stays until things calm down, then quietly disappears again. That is how she loves, close enough to matter, far enough to survive. And when Dune curls beside her without asking for performance, without demanding reassurance, something inside Lisa softens, not dramatically, not visibly, just enough. A creature that could leave and chooses not to. That feeling changes something. Here's what nobody told her. She grew up where affection arrived after achievement, where warmth had conditions, where silence lasted longer than comfort ever did. Dune asks nothing from her. Dune simply stays, and that quiet decision feels safer than most people. Her story is not unusual. That is the uncomfortable part. Because many people watching this learn to associate love with emotional uncertainty. And once that happens, the nervous system adapts forever. Not loudly, quietly, until self-protection starts sounding exactly like personality. Here's what I know. Samuel Gosling from the University of Texas studied thousands of pet owners, and the findings felt personal. Cat people scored higher in openness to experience, more reflective, more comfortable inside complexity, more willing to sit with contradiction without forcing resolution. They also scored higher in emotional sensitivity, not weakness sensitivity, the kind that notices everything and rarely switches itself off. Jeffrey Katz from Carroll University found something similar. Dog people scored higher in external sociability, more energized by connection, more comfortable with visible affection. Neither profile is better, and not every cat person is afraid of closeness. Sometimes independence is simply peace. But both patterns reveal something about how people learned love long before adulthood arrived, and most viewers already know which side feels familiar before the research even appears. Here is where it changes. This is not personality alone, it is memory repeating itself. If you grew up somewhere loud, where affection arrived easily, where someone hugged first without hesitation, you learned something important. You learned connection is safe, that reaching is allowed, that love moves toward people without fear of humiliation. A dog mirrors that pattern exactly, constant, visible, certain. But if you grew up differently, everything changes. If love arrived quietly, through responsibility instead of emotion, through fixing problems instead of naming feelings, you learned another language entirely. You learned that closeness should never become overwhelming, that needing too much creates danger. And maybe nobody told you directly. You just watched carefully. Children always do. The child inside you still remembers those rooms, still studies silence carefully, still calculates emotional risk before reaching toward anyone, and eventually you became very good at independence. People admire it in you. They call you grounded, self-sufficient, easy to respect. And part of you likes hearing that because the alternative feels harder. Admitting you stopped reaching long before anyone noticed. That realization usually arrives late. 2 in the morning, late apartment, quiet, late phone, glowing in darkness, late, when even the cat is sleeping, and suddenly, the silence changes shape. What once felt peaceful starts sounding empty. And this is the strange part. Most people around you probably think you are thriving, because your wall looks beautiful. Organized, successful, calm but beautiful walls still keep people outside, and once you realize that, you start noticing something painful. How many conversations ended early because vulnerability approached the surface? How many relationships stayed incomplete because distance felt safer than honesty? How many opportunities disappeared silently, simply because vulnerability arrived first? How many versions of yourself never fully reached another person? Every cat person understands this wall, the preference for relationships that never crowd the nervous system, the instinct to edit vulnerability before it fully leaves your mouth, the habit of waiting to be chosen first, instead of choosing openly. And sometimes you call it introversion, when it is actually protection. The armor never asked permission. It grew automatically. Like trees bending toward sunlight, like instincts forming during storms, you built the wall carefully because once upon a time it worked perfectly. It protected something fragile when safety felt unpredictable, but survival structures have consequences, especially when the danger disappears and the wall never notices, so it keeps standing, doing its old job faithfully. Even inside safer rooms, Gosling noticed something underneath cat people reported lower satisfaction, in social connection specifically. Not because they wanted less love, but because reaching felt expensive. The risk felt larger than the loneliness itself, and eventually waiting becomes identity, personality, preference, lifestyle. But underneath all those words, the same need still exists. Quietly, persistently, wanting someone to enter, without destroying the room, and quiet loneliness has a strange side effect. You stop noticing it immediately, until one ordinary evening feels heavier than it should, and suddenly you realize you built a life. Almost nobody can interrupt. That realization hits slowly, not dramatically, just enough to change the way silence sounds afterward, because eventually even comfort zones can begin feeling like prisons. Here is why this matters now. The pattern never stays contained. It moves forward silently, into homes, into children, into ordinary conversations. If you are raising someone now, they are studying your relationship with emotional need, not your speeches, your behavior. They notice who reaches first, who apologizes first, who disappears emotionally. When vulnerability enters the room, inheritance rarely sounds dramatic. Most of the time, it sounds normal. That is why it survives. The inheritance is not the cat. It is the posture toward closeness, passed quietly between generations without anybody naming it. But here's the important part. Your pattern is not failure. You already know how to love deeply, with precision, with loyalty, with attention most people miss. That is real, that matters. The question is not whether you can love someone. The question is whether someone can fully feel your love before the wall edits it away. Walls rarely collapse instantly. Usually a door appears first. One honest sentence, one vulnerable reach. One moment where you stop translating your feelings into silence. You do not need transformation, you need recognition. Because some people spend decades being loved sincerely without ever believing they were safe enough to receive it. Think carefully about this. When was the first time somebody understood your distance correctly? Not as coldness, not as rejection, but as protection. And what did that realization reveal about the version of yourself you built to survive? And maybe that version of you deserved compassion all along. Not because the wall was perfect, but because it kept you alive long enough to become someone capable of finally opening the door. Being seen is the first step to coming home.